Templar's shadow, a treasure lost to time, a curse bound by secrets. Chapter 1. The Shadow of Friday the 13th. The night sky in Paris lay heavy beneath low-hanging clouds. A cold autumn wind rattled the shutters of the many houses that crowded the narrow, twisting streets. It was the year 1307, and a chill seemed to grip the city itself, as though a dark foreboding settled over the metropolis. Under flickering torchlight, royal guards marched with grim determination toward the temple, once a proud fortress, now the seat of the Knights Templar's administrative hub in the French realm. King Philip IV had spent months orchestrating the downfall of the Templars. Rumors swirled that the order possessed unimaginable wealth, and with France deep in debt to these warrior monks, the king saw no other way forward but to seize the Templars' fortunes. Philip, rarely one to show emotion, had grown increasingly suspicious of anyone beyond his immediate circle, and his spiritual fears were stoked by questionable whisperers at court. Under such pressure, he had co-opted the papacy itself, managing to have Pope Clement V dance to his tune. Together, they planned a decisive strike. It was in the pre-dawn hours of Friday the 13th, an ill-fated date whose terror would echo through history, that the betrayal took shape. Secret orders were dispatched throughout the kingdom. Bailiffs and seneschals broke into Templar preceptories and rounded up the unsuspecting knights, sergeants, and chaplains. Forewarned by only the vaguest suspicions of political tension, the Templars had gone to rest the previous night, without the faintest inkling that a nightmare awaited them come morning. Within the walls of the Paris temple, the Grand Master Jacques de Molay sat in silent prayer. His once powerful hands, scarred from decades of battle in the Holy Land, trembled with a new, unsettling knowledge that the world was about to collapse around him. Rumors had reached his ears the night before, carried by a sympathetic messenger with ties to the royal household. Yet the Grand Master could hardly believe that Philip IV would dare strike against an order sworn to protect pilgrims in the faith. Across the courtyard, aging Templars drifted between their devotions and daily routines, oblivious to the horns and rattling weapons drawing closer. When the royal troops crashed through the main gate, they found only moderate resistance. A handful of armed knights formed a shield wall at the fortress entrance, but they were hopelessly outnumbered by the swarm of guards. Swords clashed in the early morning gloom. The Templars' famed discipline steadied their arms, but confusion gnawed at their hearts. Why were they under attack? Was there no warning from the papacy? As dawn broke, men were dragged away in chains, blood streaked across the temple courtyard. The once imposing fortress fell silent, save for the anguished moans of the wounded. Grand Master de Molay and his closest confidants found themselves clapped in irons, escorted by heavily armed royal guards to a cell deep beneath the city. The Templar banner, bearing the red cross on a white field, lay in tatters on the ground, spattered with mud and blood. The horses that had once carried knights to battle in the Holy Land now stamped in confusion. By midday, the streets of Paris buzzed with rumors, fear, and the cawing of ravens circling overhead. Townsfolk whispered about arrests in every corner of France. Every Templar preceptory, they said, had been taken in one fell swoop. The scale of the operation stunned even the worldly merchants and chroniclers who had witnessed countless intrigues. Yet King Philip had played his hand well. By capturing the Templars in a single morning's operation, he seized not only their persons, but their records, their coffers, their relics, and, if legends were to be believed, their mysterious secrets. Still, some in the city speculated that not everything was lost. The Templars were renowned for their cunning and global networks, from the ports of Acre to the trading houses of London. Could they have hidden something, treasure, relics, or knowledge, before the king's men arrived? In hushed corners of inns and taverns, Men swore the Templars had spirited away their most valuable artifacts to unknown lands, using ships that had quietly left the port of La Rochelle days or even weeks before. In the minds of those eager for tales of glory and intrigue, this possibility gleamed with the brilliance of gold. Within his cold, damp cell, Jacques de Molay pondered the same question. Had the Templar Order's keepers of secrets acted swiftly enough to hide what must remain hidden? Did the carefully concealed caches of relics, manuscripts, or fortunes find safe passage out of France? He did not know for certain, for communication within the Order was carefully compartmentalized. What he did know was this: the Templars had long prepared for the worst. They had faced extermination before, by Saracen armies in the east. Every preceptory was trained to survive or vanish if an overwhelming threat emerged. It was part of their discipline, ingrained in them since the days when they first took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Hours turned to days, and the arrests continued. Those Templars not captured outright fled into the countryside or went to ground in sympathetic territories. Networks of safe houses sprang into action. Along remote roads in Aquitaine, in the hills of Occitania, on the coasts of Normandy and Brittany, scattered brethren donned civilian garb, or joined communities of traveling friars to escape detection. A silent, desperate exodus had begun. Unbeknownst to the larger world, one small band of Templar knights carried within their ranks a burden so precious and perhaps so dangerous that should it fall into the hands of the king or the pope, the ramifications could change the very fate of Christendom. Whether that burden was the rumored Holy Grail, sacred bones of early Christian saints, documents that challenged the Church's authority, or perhaps a piece of the true cross, none but the highest inner circle knew for certain. That precious object or trove would become the heart of rumors for centuries to come, the impetus for treasure hunters, clandestine orders, and keepers of arcane wisdom, all seeking to unravel the Templars' final secret. By Friday evening, a silent shock hung over France. The Templars, once untouchable, had been struck low. Ordinary men huddled in doorways, whispering about a curse on the king, uttered by the furious Templars. A rumor spread that in the final hours of the day, Jacques de Molay had been hauled before a tribunal, half-starved, forced to confess to heresies he vehemently denied. The seeds of something sinister were planted in the fabric of French society, and the reverberations of that day would endure far beyond Philip's reign. And in a small candle-lit chamber, unbeknownst to the watchful eyes of the royal guards, a trembling Templar clerk managed to slip free of the fortress with a single sealed parchment. That document, written by de Molay's own hand, was said to contain cryptic instructions for finding and protecting something invaluable. Before vanishing into the labyrinth of Parisian streets, the clerk prayed, "May God protect the secret now entrusted to him, for it was far too momentous to fall under the dominion of mortal kings." Chapter 2. The Silent Oaths. Weeks passed. Interrogations ensued in the king's dungeons as the Templar prisoners, under the weight of torture and the looming threat of death, spoke in fragments. Some, desperate to end their torment, repeated the malicious charges whispered by the inquisitors: denial of Christ, secret idols, and blasphemous rituals. Others clung to silence, resolved that truth would outlast their physical suffering. Yet a cold reality set in. The Templar Order was unlikely to survive these coordinated attacks. Pope Clement V, seated in Avignon, publicly lamented the necessity of these arrests, but privately acknowledged that he was helpless before Philip's relentless will. The papacy had become shackled to French influence, a predicament that weighed heavily on Clement's conscience. He knew the Templars were not guiltless in every respect. No institution, however holy, was free from earthly flaws. But he doubted the wild accusations. Still, the machinery of Inquisition had been unleashed, and to stand in its way would cost the Pope dearly. In the darkest corners of the dungeons, clandestine communication took place. Through coded knocks on stone walls, lines whispered through cell grates, and subtle signals passed by Templar chaplains, messages survived. If there was any chance of rescue, or of preserving the Templar spirit, those who remained free must know that the king's net was tightening. It was rumored that high-ranking Templars who had not been captured, men like Brother Bertrand de Sevaux and Brother Luca della Torre, were making their way towards safe harbours in distant kingdoms such as Scotland or Portugal, where Templars still had allies. In a cramped cell, lit by the flickering flame of a single torch in the corridor, Jacques de Molay knelt on the damp straw floor. He prayed for divine guidance, for wisdom to endure what lay ahead. The Grand Master understood that the Order's dissolution might be inevitable. In the quiet corners of his memory, he recalled the first vow he took in Jerusalem, to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy City. The Templar rule was strict: poverty, chastity, obedience, but above all, unwavering devotion to the cause of Christ. Now that devotion was twisted by their enemies into accusations of heresy. The irony did not escape him. From time to time, an inquisitor would appear, scowling, brandishing heated irons or racks, demanding to know where the Templar fortune lay hidden. De Molay had no illusions. The king was less interested in the Templars' purported spiritual crimes and more consumed by the possibility of an immeasurable treasure, gold, jewels, relics, or manuscripts that might give him an edge over rival monarchs. De Molay refused to speak of any Templar wealth. Yet one name still haunted him: the commander of Auvergne, Émile de Charnay, a man who had served loyally for over a decade. Before the arrests, Émile had quietly vanished with a small retinue of knights, each man selected for his unwavering dedication. De Molay had an inkling that the commander might be carrying out the Order's last, desperate contingency plan. Miles away, hidden among forest roads, Émile and his men picked their way under cover of night. They kept their white mantles concealed to avoid detection by suspicious villagers or roving bandits who would see them as easy prey. When they stopped to rest, they posted double watches. Their destination, a secret preceptory nestled in the hills of Occitania, near the ruins of an old Cathar fortress. The Templars had occasionally offered refuge to persecuted Cathars during the final days of that heresy's suppression. The fortress was all but forgotten by official records, making it a perfect hiding place. They carried with them a large trunk, carved with Templar sigils and bound with iron clasps. Though the men rarely spoke of its contents, the trunk's significance weighed on them all. Some of the knights suspected it held gold coins, while others believed it to be full of relics or even documentation of Templar privileges that could be used as leverage against their enemies. Émile alone held the key, and the truth lay behind his guarded eyes. Arriving at their destination before dawn, Émile's party found the crumbling fortress a mere shadow of its former self. Cracked battlements jutted out from thick foliage, birds nested in the towers. Inside the broken walls, however, they discovered a hidden crypt. By torchlight, they navigated narrow steps that spiraled downward into a dank chamber. The stale air smelled of limestone and ancient secrets. In that subterranean room, they labored to pry open a concealed niche in the wall. Centuries-old mortar gave way to reveal a narrow recess. Their hearts pounded with reverent fear as Émile solemnly placed the trunk within. A cloth-wrapped object the size of a chalice or small box, which Émile carried separately, was nestled on top. Then the knights replaced the stone blocks, carefully smoothing the mortar so that it appeared undisturbed. After reciting a prayer for guidance, Émile turned to his companions with a grave expression. "By this act," he murmured, voice echoing against the stone, We uphold the oath of silence. May Providence watch over what we have sealed here until such time as it can be safely revealed, or must be destroyed." The men lowered their heads, crossing themselves in unison. Duty performed, they climbed back to the surface. Among them, a brother with trembling hands confessed his fear. "What if they find us? What if the king's men torture us for the location?" Emile laid a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "We must not falter. Even if every Templar is hunted, our vow remains. Nothing must compel us to speak of this place." Outside the fortress, dawn broke across the valley. The small band of Templars blended into the shadows, continuing on their path. Some might journey to unknown lands, some to secret enclaves in Iberia. Others would scatter in hopes of reuniting with allies who could provide false identities. None dared reveal the location of the fortress or the nature of what had been buried there. The king's wrath was vast, the Inquisition merciless. Only the vow of absolute secrecy stood between them and the destruction of what they believed to be their last sacred trust. Back in Paris, King Philip's frustration mounted. Daily, his men interrogated Templars, chasing rumor after rumor. Ships had indeed slipped out of La Rochelle. Documents showed that the Templars once possessed a formidable naval presence. Yet no one could produce evidence of any grand treasure. The few scattered chests of coins seized in Templar preceptories failed to match the hype of their rumored wealth. Meanwhile, Pope Clement fretted from Avignon, aware that international outrage was growing. The Templars had friends in England, Aragon, Portugal, and the Holy Roman Empire. Suspicions arose that Philip's campaign was less about heresy and more about gold. But the king persisted. He was convinced that some monstrous idol or hideous blasphemy lay behind the Templars' power. He demanded confessions that would justify the dissolution of the order and the seizure of all their properties. He wanted proof that they worshipped Baphomet, or spat upon the cross. And if the Templars did possess relics once held in the Temple of Solomon, or manuscripts revealing dangerous secrets, he would claim them. In the hushed gloom of the royal palace, whispers circulated of a curse uttered by Jacques de Molay, condemning the king and the pope to the judgment of God before the year's end. Such rumors were stoked by Templar sympathizers, but they sank deep into the collective consciousness of the French court. Superstitious dread took hold, fueling nightmares that haunted even Philip IV himself. Far from these political intrigues, in the time-worn hills of Occitania, a hidden trunk lay entombed beneath layers of stone. Perhaps it was nothing more than a decoy. Or perhaps it contained an artifact so potent, so sacred, that the Templars believed it must not be desecrated by ambitious kings or corrupted popes. With the fortress once used by Cathars, heresy upon heresy seemed to converge in that lonely place. If discovered, it could either vindicate or condemn the entire Templar order and reshape the destiny of Christendom. Chapter 3. The Grand Master's Prayer. The prison cell had become a dark confessional for Jacques de Molay. Months had passed since the arrests, and many Templars languished in squalid conditions. De Molay had been brought before panels of inquisitors time and again, always refusing to yield to spurious charges. Though frail from torture and deprivation, his resolve remained unbroken. His faith in God's justice gave him a fierce determination, though at times he questioned the church authorities who forsook him. Late one night, a kindly guard, perhaps moved by pity or bribed by Templar supporters, slipped into de Molay's cell and offered a small scrap of parchment and quill. "You should write down what must be remembered," the guard whispered, "for who knows how long your voice will remain unheard." De Molay used that precious moment to pen a final testament, neither an admission of guilt nor a denial of wrongdoing, but a prayer for the souls of his persecutors and a restatement of the Templars' original mission. "We sought only to defend the pilgrims and uphold our vow to Christ," he wrote. "If we have failed, may God forgive us. If we are condemned unfairly, may God judge our oppressors." The guards smuggled the parchment out of the dungeon, delivering it secretly to a Templar sympathizer, a scholar named Brother Ambrose of Sens. Ambrose, already under suspicion for advocating Templar innocence, risked everything to preserve the Grand Master's words. He hid the parchment in a psalter, hoping it would never be found. If discovered, it would serve as a crucial piece of evidence, both for de Molay's piety and for the betrayal at the heart of the Templar downfall. In Avignon, Pope Clement V wrestled with his conscience. He received piles of interrogation records filled with contradictory confessions. An older cardinal, known for his bluntness, confronted Clement in a private audience. "Holy Father, these men are being tortured into speaking falsehoods. Can we not intercede, if only to remain in the light of justice?" Clement sighed. "The king's wrath is unstoppable," he responded. "My hands are tied by political necessity, yet I fear we are condemning the innocent." Meanwhile, the rumors of hidden Templar wealth, or relics, or both, only grew. From tavern to tavern, travelers shared increasingly colorful legends. Some claimed that the Templars had unearthed the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. Others insisted they held the Holy Grail. More sober chronicles mentioned documents that could incriminate the French royal house, or compromise the papacy's claims to spiritual primacy. Merchants who once dealt with the order described labyrinthine trade routes, spanning from Outremer to Iberia, each route a potential escape channel. For many common folk, the Templars' downfall highlighted the fragility of fortunes in Christendom. If an order as powerful as the Temple could be crushed, how could lesser men hope to stand against tyranny? Some of the populace began to see the Templars as martyrs rather than heretics, stirring unrest that made the king uneasy. In the depths of his cell, Jacques de Molay felt all these tensions converge on his soul. He prayed for Émile de Charnay and the other Templars still at large, certain they carried the order's most sacred possessions or records. He consoled himself that their success might justify the suffering now endured by those imprisoned. When guards forced him to stand for hours in darkness or bound him on the rack, he pictured Émile riding free beneath an open sky, the trunk secure, Templar secrets kept safe from avarice. Amidst the gloom, a subtle shift occurred. The Inquisitors, determined to crush the Templars, inadvertently let slip details of another faction seeking the rumored treasure. Some said these were agents of the king's rival, possibly from the Crown of Aragon, or mercenaries employed by unscrupulous noblemen. Others whispered darkly of an offshoot of the Templars themselves, a faction that wanted control of the relic for their own ends. Conspiracy abounded, but the Grand Master, locked away, could do nothing. Not far from the king's residence, in the study of Brother Ambrose, the precious testament of de Molay lay hidden. Ambrose read and reread those lines, tears staining the parchment. He knew the Templar order was likely doomed, but he believed the truth might yet emerge. As an archivist, Ambrose had access to older Templar records once stored at the University of Paris. He discovered references to a secret Templar retreat in the Languedoc region, close to where Cathar's strongholds once stood. Though not naming it outright, the documents alluded to a sanctum used during times of crisis. Perhaps Émile and his men had indeed gone there. One foggy afternoon, Ambrose slipped out of the city with a single traveling companion, a young monk named Mathieu, who had pledged to help keep the Templar cause alive. They carried minimal provisions, disguised as simple pilgrims heading south. Their purpose, to find the sanctum or any surviving Templar who could shed light on the catastrophe befalling the order. If they succeeded, maybe they could keep the chain of knowledge unbroken. If they failed, all might be lost. Days of travel turned into weeks as they crossed the fields and forests of central France. Each night they took shelter where they could, abbeys, barns, or beneath the stars. They spoke little of their true mission, mindful that the Inquisition had ears everywhere. More than once they passed through villages where Templars had been seized, or where inquisitors burned documents in public squares. With each sight, their resolve hardened. Eventually, they entered the rugged terrain of the Pyrenean foothills, the region once teeming with Cathar refugees. Here, watchful eyes peered from behind shuttered windows, suspicious of strangers. Ambrose and Mathieu knew they were close. They followed ancient markers, symbols etched into stone, that the Templars sometimes used to discreetly guide fellow knights on pilgrim roads. At last, they beheld the ruins of a fortress perched on a crag, half shrouded by morning mist. Could this be the sanctum mentioned in the texts? Stepping carefully over fallen masonry, they approached the blackened remains of a gatehouse. Through the rubble, they glimpsed the faint outline of a courtyard. Silence reigned except for the eerie call of a lone raven overhead. Ambrose's heart quickened as they ventured deeper. One wrong move, and the entire structure might collapse, or a hidden sentry might attack. In the courtyard, they found footprints, fresh ones. Crouching low, Mathieu touched a heel mark in the dust. "Someone has been here recently," he whispered. The two monks exchanged apprehensive glances. Who else would come to this desolate fortress? Allies or foes? Step by cautious step, they advanced. Then a figure emerged from behind a toppled column. A man in a dirt-stained tunic, sword drawn. The Templar cross on his mantle had been crudely ripped off, but faint traces remained. His eyes flashed with alarm. Ambrose instinctively raised his hands. "We are friends," he said. "We come in peace, searching for those who remain true to the temple. I have a message from our Grand Master." The man hesitated, sword wavering. In a hoarse voice, he replied, "What do you know of the Grand Master?" Ambrose carefully reached into his cloak and produced a wooden cross embossed with the Templar sigil, something only Templar chaplains or close allies carried. "We seek to protect the Order's final secrets," he murmured. "If you have knowledge, if you are among the faithful, help us." Slowly, the tension in the man's posture eased. He lowered the sword. "Follow me, quietly," he said. They trailed him into the heart of the fortress's remains, eventually descending a flight of stone steps into a large vaulted chamber. There, by dim torchlight, Ambrose beheld a small group of men, some in battered Templar garb, others in plain tunics. They turned, hands on hilts, their faces a mixture of weariness and hope. In their midst stood Émile de Charnay. Ambrose's breath caught in his throat. To see a figure of Templar authority alive and free, amid the kingdom's relentless persecution, felt like a minor miracle. A flicker of recognition passed through Émile's eyes. He had met Ambrose once, long ago in Paris, though under calmer circumstances. "Brother Ambrose," Émile greeted him, voice burdened by sorrow. "You risk much by coming here. What word from the Grand Master?" Ambrose bowed his head. "He endures. But I fear the worst for him. He sent us nothing formal, only a prayer to keep the light of the Order alive. I have read your name in the Templar archives and followed the clues to this place. If you carry the sacred trust, I beg you let me see it, to confirm its safety." Émile studied the monk for a long moment, then nodded. "We have hidden it well, though the fortress is no fortress anymore. King Philip's men search for us, and we can't remain here indefinitely. But come." He led Ambrose and Mathieu to the underground crypt. There, in the flicker of torchlight, Émile recounted how they had sealed away the trunk and other items in a hidden chamber. Ambrose listened, enraptured. If the trunk indeed contained relics or crucial documents, it might be the final lifeline for the Templars' legacy. Yet one question burned in Ambrose's mind. What exactly lies inside that trunk? Emile hesitated. I am bound by the strictest oath to the Grand Master. All I can say is that it holds objects of profound significance, holy or otherwise, and must remain safeguarded from those who would misuse them. A heavy silence followed. The possibility of a great Templar treasure, a sacred relic, or heretical writings weighed on Ambrose's soul. He realized that, for better or worse, the Templars believed it of the utmost importance. And if the Templars deemed it so, then perhaps it was worth every sacrifice they had made, and were yet to make. Chapter 4. Flight and Pursuit. As dawn lit the abandoned fortress in soft orange hues, Emile gathered his knights and the two monks, explaining that they could not linger much longer. The king's men have grown desperate, he warned. They will stop at nothing to eradicate us and seize what we guard. Provisions were meagre, and the fortress, though remote, was compromised by footprints and the smell of cooking fires, telltale signs of habitation. A single spy or a suspicious local could alert the Inquisition. The Templars decided on a bold course. They would depart in small groups to reduce the chance of detection. Some would head toward Aragon, where the Inquisition's grip was slightly less crushing. Others would risk the journey north to Paris, hoping to aid imprisoned brethren or gather intelligence from Templar sympathizers. Emile and a select few would remain to guard the crypt until a safer hiding place could be secured. Ambrose and Mathieu offered to carry word to Avignon, to Pope Clement Memphis himself, in a last-ditch appeal for leniency. While unlikely to sway the papal court, they felt compelled to try. Perhaps, if they presented de Molay's pious testament, it might at least mitigate the severity of the condemnation looming over the entire order. Emile gave them an encrypted letter addressed to any Templar faithful. May it guide you safely, he said. But be warned, the Inquisition will see in it only treachery. Before departing, Ambrose took Emile aside. You are certain the crypt is well concealed? The Templar commander nodded gravely. We've left no sign. Even if someone stumbles upon the fortress, they will likely see only rubble. He paused, placing a hand on Ambrose's shoulder. Pray for us. And if you do speak to the Pope, tell him we have no quarrel with him. We only beg to retain our honor and keep our relics from profane hands. The small exodus began. Groups of men, dressed as peasants or pilgrims, carried little more than sacks of bread and water skins, ensuring they left no trail. Ambrose and Mathieu, burdened by the knowledge of the trunk's existence, set off on horseback by a circuitous route, hoping to reach Avignon unnoticed. Dark clouds massed on the horizon, an ill omen for a journey that already teemed with danger. They rode for days, skirting towns known to host royal garrisons. Along the way, they encountered refugees, Templars who had been stripped of rank and cast out to wander. Some bore fresh lash wounds. Others displayed haunted stares, living shadows of their former selves. From their stories, Ambrose learned that the Inquisitors had begun transferring Templar captives to major cities, staging public trials to drum up charges of heresy. Many were forced under torture to denounce the order. The heartbreak was palpable. Rumor reached them that King Philip had demanded the immediate dissolution of the Templars, and that Pope Clement was close to issuing a papal bull condemning the order. If such a decree came to pass, every Templar property and possession would be seized by the crown, or distributed to other military orders like the Hospitallers. The sense of impending finality weighed heavily on Ambrose's conscience. Was the trunk in Occitania about to become an orphan of an extinguished order, a relic with no rightful guardians? Late one night, near the banks of a wide river, Ambrose and Mathieu came upon a lone traveller with a donkey, collecting firewood. After a wary exchange, the traveller confessed he was a messenger for the Templar master of Portugal. He carried dispatches detailing how the Portuguese king, Denis, was considering offering sanctuary to Templars fleeing persecution, potentially rebranding them under a new order to sidestep papal condemnation. The messenger cautioned that crossing the Pyrenees would be treacherous. King Philip's men had set up watchpoints. Ambrose thanked him, though his immediate path lay toward Avignon. Still, he felt a spark of hope that not all kingdoms had turned against the temple. Perhaps, in time, this trunk, and whatever it held, might find a safe haven under Portuguese protection. The messenger bid them farewell, trudging on with his donkey into the moonlit night. 2 days later, Ambrose and Mathieu approached Avignon's outskirts. The papal enclave loomed ahead. A cluster of grand buildings, high walls, and bustling streets. Refugees, pilgrims, and courtiers all thronged the roads. Securing an audience with the Pope would not be easy, and they risked arrest if anyone suspected them of being Templar agents. Ambrose, however, had once studied in Avignon's libraries. He knew a back way into the city, a seldom-used postern gate by the river. They timed their entry at dusk, slipping into the crowded quarter with heads bowed. Under the cover of darkness, Ambrose made contact with an old friend, Father Gaston, who worked in the papal chancellery. Shock registered on the priest's face upon recognizing Ambrose. "You are wanted men," Father Gaston hissed. "The Inquisition has your names. They say you're Templar sympathizers, heretics." Still, the priest ushered them into his modest lodging. There, by a guttering candle, Ambrose showed him the testament of Jacques de Molay, hidden in the psalter. The priest's eyes misted as he read the words. "I will try to help you see the Pope," Father Gaston said softly. "But keep your expectations low. The king has ears everywhere, and the Holy Father is ill these days, terrified of incurring Philip's wrath." Over the next several days, Father Gaston navigated the labyrinth of papal administration, dropping discreet hints that there was a Templar defense, a final plea that needed Clement's attention. Finally, Ambrose and Mathieu were ushered through a side entrance of the papal palace, crossing quiet corridors lined with tapestries. Their hearts pounded. Even with a small-scale, almost secret audience, they feared the presence of papal guards or hidden inquisitors. They were led to a dimly lit chamber where Pope Clement V sat in a high-backed chair, flanked by 2 cardinals. The Pope's appearance startled Ambrose, gaunt, hollow-eyed, as if burdened by guilt and ill health. Father Gaston introduced the pair in hushed tones, calling them brothers in Christ, who had travelled far to deliver a final message from the Templars. Clement's voice was weary. "Speak quickly," he said. "I am told you bring some testament from Jacques de Molay." Ambrose stepped forward and handed over the parchment. One of the cardinals read it aloud, voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "If we are condemned, we accept God's will. But we plead with our Holy Father not to condemn the innocent with the guilty, nor let the ambitions of kings overshadow the truth. We, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, have only served with our hearts, flawed though we may be. Let not the memory of our order be wholly destroyed." The Pope listened, resting his head against the chair, eyes half closed, silence stretched. Finally he murmured, "I would spare them if I could. But I am but a shepherd with a knife at my back. The king demands my compliance. If I refuse, the Church stands to lose its unity. Kingdoms will break from Rome." Ambrose trembled with emotion. "Holy Father, all we ask is that you consider mercy. Too many have died already, and the Templars are being slandered with monstrous accusations. Your own conscience must tell you that many are false." He hesitated, debating whether to mention the trunk in Occitania, but caution prevailed. Revealing too much might only worsen matters. The Templars hold artifacts of deep sanctity. Should these fall into the hands of men who do not fear God, unimaginable harm could be done. A flicker of curiosity lit Clement's eyes. Artifacts? Do you speak of relics they claim to have discovered in the Holy Land? A slight cough shook him. I have heard the rumors, but nothing is proven. They exist, Holiness, Ambrose said carefully, and they are safeguarded, but now the guardians themselves are imperiled. Clement sighed heavily. I cannot defy Philip directly, but I will not hasten the final condemnation. I will require more deliberation, more evidence. It may buy time, though I doubt it will halt the king. He drew a shaky breath. You have done your duty to your order and to your faith. Now leave this place. Hide yourselves, for Avignon is no safe refuge for Templar allies. The cardinals exchanged worried glances. One of them cleared his throat. Holiness, we must be mindful of the crown's envoys. They are likely tracking any Templar sympathizers. Clement nodded, turning to Ambrose and Mathieu. Flee this city. I beg your pardon for not offering sanctuary, but my hands are tied. May God guide you. With that, the audience was over. Guards escorted Ambrose and Mathieu out, surreptitiously leading them away from prying eyes. They emerged onto the streets of Avignon in a daze, uncertain whether their mission had accomplished anything. Pope Clement had promised a delay, not a reversal, of the Templars' fate. Perhaps a short reprieve was all they could hope for. That very night, as Ambrose and Mathieu prepared to depart, word reached them that an arrest warrant had been issued in their names. They had tarried too long. Avignon had become a trap. Under cover of darkness, they fled on borrowed horses, crossing the Rhône River with no plan but to elude capture. Close on their trail was a group of armed men, carrying the royal fleur-de-lis on their surcoats. They had orders to seize any Templar partisans. The chase began in earnest, as Ambrose and Mathieu spurred their horses through winding country roads. Behind them, torchlight glowed ominously, the hoofbeats of pursuers closing in. The smell of sweat and fear hung in the cool night air. The two monks galloped until their mounts were on the verge of collapse. At a fork in the road, they plunged into a dense forest, navigating half-seen paths by moonlight. Fortune favored them that night. The pursuing knights lost the trail amid the thick trees and twisting ravines. Ambrose and Mathieu stopped in a clearing, hearts pounding, to catch their breath. They prayed for deliverance. Then they pressed on, uncertain where they would find safe haven. In the far distance, a wolf howled, a lonely cry that seemed to echo their desperation. The monarchy, the Inquisition, even a reluctant pope. All forces converged to stamp out the Templar legacy. And somewhere, hidden in a ruined fortress, lay the trunk and possibly the answers to a riddle that would haunt generations to come. Had the Knights Templar concealed a great treasure or sacred relics before their dissolution? Chapter 5. Deep in Occitania. Back in the crumbling fortress in Occitania, Émile de Charnay stood atop a broken parapet and gazed across the mist-shrouded valley. The morning light revealed scattered farms and a winding river. All seemed tranquil, yet he knew better than to trust appearances. He had only a small contingent of loyal knights left, men half-starved and haunted by the memory of fallen brothers. Each day they repaired the fortress's hidden crypt, ensuring no hint of its location would surface. A few of the local villagers, sympathetic to the Templars, occasionally brought food. From these furtive interactions, Émile gleaned snippets of news. The king's men had grown more aggressive, conducting random searches and executing suspected Templar supporters without formal trials. Nearby castles belonging to the order had been forcibly seized, their chapels ransacked. Only the remote corners of the Languedoc still offered any semblance of refuge. One dreary afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. A tall figure, draped in a hooded cloak, approached the fortress on foot, guiding a weary mule behind him. The Templars braced for a confrontation, but the newcomer lifted his hood to reveal he was Brother Luca della Torre, once a commander in the Holy Land. Relief and joy passed among the men. Luca had been missing since the arrests began. In the great hall, a shadowy chamber with half its roof collapsed, Emile embraced Luca. "God be praised you are alive. We feared the king's men had taken you." Luca's eyes were red from exhaustion, but his posture remained soldier straight. "I fled north, seeking any hint of a possible alliance," he explained. "But the king has turned all France against us. Our only hopes lie beyond these borders." The two commanders spoke at length, recounting the scattered pockets of Templars still resisting. Some had found exile in Scotland, where King Robert the Bruce allegedly offered them asylum after his excommunication. Others had slipped into German territories. A clandestine Templar presence was rumoured in Cyprus, though that island had been lost to the Order's direct control after the fall of Acre. "At times, I wonder if we should simply abandon France altogether," Luca mused. "Take the relic, whatever it is, and carry it to Portugal. There, King Denis might let us rebuild under a new name. The Templar spirit could live on." Emile sighed. "But to move the trunk poses grave risks. If it fell into the wrong hands while in transit..." He trailed off. The notion of losing the relic, if relic it was, haunted him. Besides, Jacques de Molay remains captive. It feels like betrayal to flee while our Grand Master suffers. Luca placed a hand on Emile's shoulder. "We cannot save him by sacrificing the entire legacy of the Order. Our vow is to protect this secret at all costs. Even de Molay would insist on that." Thus, the debate raged. A minority believed that the trunk should stay hidden in Occitania, trusting that this remote fortress would remain undiscovered. Others insisted that the region was too hot with royal patrols. The fortress itself was hardly defensible. Time was running out. If they stayed, they might be cornered. If they left, they risked detection on the roads. In the end, a decision was reached. They would remain for a short while longer, gathering supplies and intelligence before making a dash toward Iberia. If the trunk had to be moved, they would travel by night, crossing into Aragon and then onward to Portugal. Emile and Luca sealed their agreement with a simple clasp of hands. The men around them, though tired, straightened with a renewed sense of purpose. In the following days, they repaired a dilapidated stable, forging new horseshoes from salvaged iron. They hunted game in nearby forests, salted the meat, and stored it for the journey. Meanwhile, a designated group secretly scouted potential routes south, noting watchtowers and guard stations. Tension ran high. Any misstep could doom them all. One particularly stormy night, lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the fortress in stark relief. Emile found himself wandering the corridors, checking on sentries. Thunder boomed, rattling loose stones. In a hidden alcove near the crypt's entrance, he paused to say a silent prayer. He wondered if the trunk truly housed holy relics, perhaps a portion of the true cross, or a sacred vessel from the Temple of Solomon. Emile had never opened it, bound by oath. He only knew that since the earliest days of the Order, rumors of a powerful relic had circulated among the highest ranks. In these moments, doubt crept in. Was it truly a relic, or some sort of heretical text? If it were something that challenged the Church's teachings, would preserving it be an act of faith or defiance? The lines blurred, yet Emile's conviction held. The Templar vow demanded obedience, and he believed in the moral core of the Order. If they had protected this secret for centuries, it could not be evil. The storm raged until dawn, wind howling through fractured towers. When day broke, a messenger arrived, panting, covered in mud. He was a villager loyal to the Templars, trembling from cold and fear. He brought grave news. King Philip's patrols were scouring the region, spurred by rumors that Templars were still at large. At least one patrol was headed in their direction. "We have little time," the villager gasped. "They search every ruin, every old castle. You must leave." No longer was there any debate. Emile, Luca, and their men scrambled to gather provisions. The trunk was unearthed from the crypt with great caution. Though it had been placed behind sealed stone blocks, they knew rummaging strangers might discover fresh mortar. With hushed prayers, the Templars wrapped the trunk in coarse blankets, disguising it as a merchant's bundle. They readied their horses, saddling them in the fortress courtyard, under the watchful eye of a single guard stationed atop the walls. Before departing, Emile stood a moment at the fortress gate, gazing upon the place that had sheltered them in their darkest hour. "God willing, we shall return to reclaim these walls," he said softly. Then, with a final glance, they rode out, a small band determined to protect the trunk at all costs. Within hours, they discovered the rumor was true. A detachment of royal soldiers was indeed canvassing the area. The Templars spotted their tents in a valley some miles to the east. Using dense forests as cover, Emile led his group westward, praying that the thick undergrowth would mask their tracks. Their flight was a perilous dance between evasion and necessity. They had to stop for water and feed the horses. They took to traveling primarily at night, sleeping by day in secluded hollows. Once or twice they saw the distant glint of armor or heard the barking of dogs. In those tense moments, they froze, hearts pounding, until the danger passed. As the band pressed on, forging deeper into Occitania, the roads became rocky and treacherous. Sharp limestone crags towered overhead, forming narrow defiles that could easily become kill zones if an ambush lay in wait. Still, they persisted, forging a path toward Aragon, where they hoped to find fewer patrols. One dusk, after a long, grueling ride, they emerged onto a high plateau overlooking a vast, rugged landscape. Clouds of purple and gold streaked the sky. Emile called for a halt, letting the horses catch their breath. He unwrapped the trunk partway to check for water damage or any sign of tampering. By torchlight, he saw the Templar sigils etched into the wood, the same design that once marked their banners. The presence of that red cross stirred deep loyalty. They were men of the temple, exiled now, but still bound by a sacred mission. While Emile stood guard, Luca knelt in prayer, the wind tousling his hair. "Lord, grant us safe passage," he whispered. "Allow us to fulfill our vow." The other knights joined in, and for a moment a sense of calm enveloped them, despite the perilous journey ahead. Then a faint noise echoed off the rocks, hoofbeats, distant yet distinct. The Templars tensed, straining to locate the source. A scout scrambled down a rocky outcrop and hissed, "Riders approaching from the north! Could be soldiers!" In a heartbeat, they doused the torch. Darkness swallowed them. Fear coiled like a serpent, but Templar discipline prevailed. They knew how to vanish into the night, cloaks drawn tight, horses saddled and muzzled to stifle any sudden neigh. Carefully they guided the trunk to a sheltered nook behind a boulder. Moments later, silhouettes appeared on a ridge. 8 or 9 riders, bearing torches scanning the terrain. Their voices drifted across the plateau. "Search every pass. The Templars must be here somewhere." The flicker of flame danced on the rocks, casting eerie shadows. Emile signaled for silence. The trunk was hidden, But if the riders drew closer, they might spot footprints or the gleam of a horse's eye. Time crawled. Each breath felt like thunder in Emil's ears. The riders moved along the ridge, shining their torches downward. One soldier dismounted to investigate a side path. The Templars tensed, hands on sword hilts, ready for a last stand if discovered. By some stroke of fortune, the soldier overlooked their hiding place. The patrol soon remounted and continued their search along the ridge, disappearing beyond a bend in the landscape. The Templars exhaled in near unison, hearts still pounding. With renewed urgency they broke camp. Night would be their ally. They must travel quickly, hoping to slip past the net King Philip had cast. The trunk, their burden and their hope, went with them, cradled like a child between the horses. Each rider in turn ensured it stayed secured, for losing it would mean failing the Grand Master and betraying their deepest vow. Far behind them, the abandoned fortress stood silent, battered by wind and rain. Royal patrols would eventually reach it, rummage through the shattered hallways, perhaps discover signs of recent occupation. But they would find the crypt empty. Whatever secrets the Templars guarded now traveled by moonlit paths, guided by faith and fear, forging into the unknown, with only the flickering promise of survival. Chapter 6. The Shifting Tides. While Emile, Luca, and their comrades threaded the perilous route toward Aragon, the tide of events elsewhere in Europe shifted quickly. In Paris, the public trials of Templars continued, orchestrated by the cunning Guillaume de Nogaret, King Philip's chief legal adviser. Under torture, some knights uttered the confessions the king desired, fueling the propaganda that the order was corrupt. The populace, at first horrified by the harshness, began to succumb to the repeated accusations and rumors of sorcery and heresy. Jacques de Molay, however, famously recanted any forced confession before a gathering of cardinals. The defiance enraged both the king and the pope. Fearing the repercussions, Clement V issued the papal bull Vox in excelso, effectively disbanding the Templars in 1312. Though the bull cited the scandal and confusion surrounding the order, it stopped short of explicitly declaring them heretical. Their property was supposedly to be transferred to the Hospitallers, but King Philip seized as much as he could. By 1314, de Molay and several senior Templars were sentenced to death by burning at the stake in Paris. According to legend, in his last moments, the Grand Master called both the king and the pope to divine judgment within the year. True or not, Pope Clement died barely a month later, and King Philip succumbed to illness before the year ended. The superstitious muttered of a Templar curse. Yet, official records remained silent on the matter of any hidden Templar treasure or relics. The legal machinery had done its work. The Templar name was wiped from official rolls, replaced by a handful of reorganized orders in Iberia, or dissolved entirely in other lands. In Avignon, Pope Clement's death created a power vacuum. Cardinals vied for influence, and the French monarchy continued to exert pressure on the papal seat. Amid the chaos, any lingering attempts to defend the Templars faded into the background. Brother Ambrose and Mathieu vanished from public view, rumored to have fled deeper into Europe. The testament of Jacques de Molay they had carried was never officially acknowledged, though a few sympathetic clerics might have copied it. History would see only scattered mentions of de Molay's final testament, overshadowed by sensational allegations of heresy. Meanwhile, in the southwestern corner of Christendom, King James II of Aragon cautiously welcomed Templar refugees, though he could not openly defy the papal and French decrees. In Portugal, King Denis created the Order of Christ, a new institution that absorbed many former Templars and allowed them to continue their traditions, albeit under a different banner. The Templar spirit, if not the name, lived on. It was into this uncertain environment that Émile de Charnay and his band now rode. Weary from evading patrols and crossing rough terrain, they eventually emerged on the Aragonese side of the Pyrenees. A local baron, known for his skepticism of French authority, granted them discreet passage to a remote chapel. The Templars spent several weeks recovering from their ordeal. In that humble chapel courtyard, Luca della Torre approached Émile one evening. "We have news from a courier. Jacques de Molay has been executed." The words landed like a hammer blow. Émile closed his eyes, tears threatening. Though he had feared such an outcome, hearing it confirmed was a cruel finality. The old world of the Templars truly was gone. "What now?" asked Luca. "Do we continue to protect the trunk, or do we let it vanish with the ashes of our Grand Master?" His voice quavered, betraying exhaustion and sorrow. Émile squared his shoulders, though heartbreak tore at him. "No," he answered firmly, "we keep our vow. Our order has been destroyed in name, but not in spirit. There may come a time when this relic or knowledge must resurface for the good of Christendom. Until then, we guard it. If we must, we bring it to Portugal. King Denis is known to be sympathetic. Under the order of Christ, we can remain faithful to our mission, even if the temple is no more." So the Templars set forth again, forging across rugged landscapes toward the Portuguese frontier. The journey took months. At times they traveled with merchant caravans, disguised as guards or porters. They learned to hide the trunk amid common wares, ensuring no prying eye recognized it as anything special. Now and again, they confronted bandits or roving mercenaries, but Templar martial discipline saw them through. Along the way, they heard fragments of news: trials of Templars in Castile, localized conflicts near Navarre, shifting alliances in the royal courts. The continent was in flux, but the Templars pressed on with singular purpose. Each night, as they made camp beneath star-studded skies, Émile or Luca would lead a short prayer, reaffirming their vow to protect what lay within that trunk. Not even curiosity tempted them to open it. Their oath bound them. Only a Grand Master, or those designated by him, had the right to break those seals. Finally, they reached Portugal. The crossing was less fraught with danger, for King Denis had no reason to arrest or persecute them. They made contact with Templar refugees who had already joined the newly formed Order of Christ. The knights of this new order wore a different emblem, but beneath that symbol lay the same dedication to faith and chivalry. Émile felt a pang of nostalgia for the red cross of the temple, but took heart that their ideals endured. King Denis was a pragmatic ruler, concerned with fostering economic growth and maintaining a strategic advantage against neighboring realms. He offered the Templars refuge under the condition they swore allegiance to his crown and accepted the new order's rules. In many respects, it was Templar discipline under a different name. Émile and Luca hesitated. Did they have the authority to take this step, or would it be a betrayal of Jacques de Molay's memory? Yet the alternative was wandering exile, with no means to safeguard the trunk. After sober reflection, they agreed to meet with the Master of the Order of Christ. The meeting took place in a modest hall near Tomar, once a Templar stronghold and now the headquarters of the new order. Torches lit the ancient stone walls, adorned with the fresh insignia of Christ. The master, Dom Gil Martins, greeted them courteously. He was a man of middle years, with a stern jaw and thoughtful eyes. "I've heard you bring something precious from France," he said. "You wish to place it under our protection?" Émile inclined his head. "We have sworn an oath to safeguard it, no matter the cost, but we are hunted men. Only under the shelter of this new order can we continue our mission." Dom Gil considered them for a moment, then extended his hand. "I understand your loyalty. I, too, was once a Templar. We must adapt or perish. Show me your trunk, if you will." Emile felt a flicker of alarm. Revealing the trunk's Templar sigils could be dangerous, even here. Still, he motioned to two knights who carried it forward. Carefully, they unwrapped the blankets, revealing the aged wood, iron clasps, and faint Templar cross. Dom Gil's eyes widened in recognition. "I've seen chests like this in Jerusalem," he whispered. "They often contained relics or crucial records." He reached out, brushing the surface with reverence. "Will you open it for me?" Emile tensed. "I am bound by oath not to break these seals, except under direct order from the Grand Master or his appointed successor. Jacques de Molay named no successor that we know of. We had hoped in time the Church might restore our order or choose a rightful leader. Until then." He trailed off, uncertain how to proceed. Dom Gil nodded slowly. "I respect your fidelity, yet we are no longer Templars in the eyes of Rome. We are the Order of Christ. Still, the heart of the temple beats in us. Perhaps it is enough that the trunk remains sealed, guarded in our strongest keep, until a day comes when it must be opened." So it was decided. The trunk would be placed in the keep at Tomar, behind layers of security, sealed away like an artifact of a bygone era. Emile and Luca, along with the other knights, would formally join the Order of Christ, pledging service to King Denis while maintaining their ancient vows of chastity, obedience, and poverty. In a solemn ceremony, they knelt on the stone floor of the chapel, receiving the Master's blessing. The trunk, draped in a crimson cloth, was placed on the altar. A hush fell as the men prayed for guidance. In that moment, the old Templar spirit mingled with the new banner of Christ. A sense of both loss and renewal permeated the air. As the final amen echoed, Emile felt a strange release. The temple was gone, but their mission persisted. They had honored Jacques de Molay and the countless brethren who had perished. The trunk was secure. For now, that was enough. Little did they know how the centuries would spin their web, weaving legend and rumor around the lost Templar treasure. They had no inkling that historians, explorers, conspiracists, and treasure hunters would one day scour archives and landscapes for a trace of this relic. Nor could they predict that deep in the future, the trunk's seal might be tested by those who believed the Templars had once held the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant, or a truth that could rock the foundations of the Church itself. They only knew that, for their part, the Templar vow remained unbroken. The trunk was safe behind thick stone walls. Their hearts, though scarred, were at peace with the knowledge that they had fulfilled their sworn duty in a world set ablaze by royal ambition and papal politics. And if there was a curse, uttered by Jacques de Molay, or by centuries of Templar suffering, it would live on, whispered in the halls of power and the secret corners of faith, a reminder that some truths refuse to stay buried. Below begins a modern-day storyline that weaves together with the medieval events to explore the question, did the Knights Templar hide a great treasure or sacred relics after their sudden dissolution? Chapter 7. A Modern-Day Scholar. Present day. Storm clouds rolled over the Portuguese skyline as Dr. Isabel Mendes parked her car near the Convento de Cristo in Tomar. A professor of medieval studies, Isabel had devoted the last decade of her career to unraveling the mysteries surrounding the Knights Templar. Most mainstream scholars considered the Templar treasure a myth, mere rumor inflated by centuries of conspiracy theories. But Dr. Mendes believed there was more to the legend. Stepping out, she hoisted her satchel over her shoulder, breathing in the scent of rain-soaked stone. The Convento de Cristo was a labyrinth of cloisters, chapels, and fortifications, once the stronghold of the Order of Christ, the successor to the Templars in Portugal. She had secured permission to study old documents in the archive, many of which had remained untranslated or poorly catalogued. Rumor had it, there were still sealed sections of the keep that had never been opened in modern times. Isabel was greeted by her colleague, Father Paulo Antunes, a mild-mannered priest and archivist. He guided her through twisting corridors lined with centuries-old tiles. "We received that special permit from the Ministry of Culture," Father Paulo said softly. "You may have access to the 14th and 15th century manuscripts, though some are fragmentary. If you find anything requiring restoration, let me know." The archive was tucked away behind a heavy wooden door. The smell of parchment and leather-bound tomes greeted her like old friends. Rows of shelves groaned under the weight of historical texts. Isabel's pulse quickened in anticipation. For years, she had combed through scattered references to a sealed Templar chest rumored to be hidden in Tamar. Most historians dismissed it as folklore. But her own father had once been a caretaker at the Convento. In his final days, he had whispered cryptic hints about a lost chest beneath the keep. She began her work by examining a set of faded manuscripts from the early 1300s, some in Latin, others in medieval Portuguese. Many were mundane: land grants, genealogical charts, and supply inventories. Occasionally, she stumbled upon tantalizing phrases referencing relics of the temple or objects carried from beyond the Pyrenees. She meticulously noted these in her journal. Every minor clue could be part of the puzzle. As the hours passed, the swirl of dust motes in the lamplight lulled her into a sort of archival trance. She nearly jumped when Father Paulo re-entered, carrying a rolled parchment. "This was found in a side cabinet," he said. "No record of it in the catalogue. Thought you might be interested." Isabel carefully unrolled the document. The script was archaic Portuguese, heavily abbreviated. A few lines stood out. "Entrusted to the keep of Christ. Remains sealed under vow. By order of Émile de Charnay and Luca della Torre." Her heart pounded. Émile de Charnay. She recognized the name from Templar rosters. She glanced at Father Paulo. "This might be exactly what I've been searching for." The priest arched an eyebrow. "A direct reference to Templar material, yes. But be mindful, our archives contain many half-truths." Isabel nodded, though excitement flared within her. She could almost hear her late father's voice urging her on. Over the next few days, she painstakingly translated the parchment, cross-referencing it with other records. Certain phrases suggested that a chest or trunk had been brought to Tomar from France, sealed under Templar oath. The text mentioned artifacts from the Holy City and a priceless vessel. Whether that was literal or metaphorical, she couldn't yet determine, but it aligned with centuries-old legends of Templar relics. One morning, while poring over the last lines of the parchment, Isabel noticed a faint watermark that might have been a map or a schematic. Under infrared scanning, kindly provided by the archive's conservation department, faint lines emerged, a rough outline of the convento's floor plan, albeit from an older era. Certain areas were marked with cryptic symbols, including a Maltese-like cross near an underground chamber. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. If this was authentic, it might show the location of a hidden vault or storeroom. Could the rumored Templar trunk still be there, overlooked by modern renovations? It seemed far-fetched, yet the possibility was too enticing to dismiss. Father Paulo expressed caution. "Remember, we've had numerous searches over the centuries. The convento's layout changed dramatically with Manueline architecture in the 16th century. Many old chambers were sealed or repurposed. It's likely that if a trunk was ever here, it's long gone." Still, she persisted. Gathering the documents, she embarked on a thorough examination of the convento's substructures. Ancient accounts mentioned a labyrinth of tunnels connecting the fortress to the Tagus River, used during sieges. Most had collapsed or been bricked up. Could the trunk still lie in some forgotten corridor? Her quest drew the curiosity of a small circle of fellow researchers, as well as the quiet scrutiny of a certain official from the Ministry of Culture who worried about the potential media frenzy if a lost Templar treasure rumor went public. Meanwhile, a local journalist, Miguel Coelho, caught wind of Isabel's project. With an eager glint in his eye, he began asking pointed questions about Templar secrets and locked vaults. Isabel, wary of sensationalism, tried to keep her work discreet. Late one evening, alone in the archive, Isabel discovered a marginal note in a 15th-century ledger referencing a chamber of silence. The script was nearly illegible, but she discerned it described a hidden chapel or oratory built beneath the old fortress. The note read, "Here rests the vow unbroken, locked by the faithful." Her spine tingled. Was this the same place alluded to in the 14th-century parchment? If so, it might correspond to the cryptic symbols on the infrared map. She pulled out a modern blueprint of the convento, comparing shapes and measurements. Though centuries of construction had altered the structure, she identified an approximate location near the southeastern wing, below the old round church. The next day, she coaxed Father Paolo into exploring the catacombs beneath the convento. They descended narrow stone steps, flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. The air was stale, tinged with damp. Dust coated every surface. Along the way, they passed boarded-up arches and collapsed corridors. Father Paolo's voice echoed off the stone walls. "We rarely come down here. Too unstable in places. Watch your footing." Eventually, they reached an unremarkable stone wall. According to Isabel's notes, this should be the approximate site of the Chamber of Silence. She ran her hands over the blocks, searching for seams or concealed entrances. Her flashlight revealed a faint carving, an elongated cross, similar to the Templar cross but partially defaced. Heart hammering, she pressed against the stone. It didn't budge. Father Paolo studied the wall. Possibly just a symbolic carving. The mortar looks ancient, though. If there's a space beyond, it may have collapsed. Isabel, refusing to give up, tapped methodically along the wall. At one spot, the sound resonated differently, hollow. She caught her breath. There is a void behind this section. Father Paolo frowned. Even if there is, we would need specialized equipment to break through safely, and official permission. We can't just hammer away at the convento's foundations. Frustration warred with excitement. Isabel realized he was right. She couldn't risk damaging a UNESCO World Heritage Site. "Let me contact the cultural authorities," she said. "I'll propose a small, controlled excavation, just enough to see what's behind there." Father Paolo nodded, though his concern was evident. "I support your research, Dr. Mendes, but do be cautious. This sort of rumor, Templar treasures and hidden relics, has attracted unscrupulous fortune hunters in the past." Isabel understood. She had read countless stories of elaborate hoaxes and sensational claims. Still, her academic intuition told her this was different. The documentary evidence was solid, and the sealed wall, with its defaced Templar cross, seemed authentic. Could the trunk left by Émile de Charnay and Luca della Torre remain entombed after all these centuries? Returning to her rented flat that night, Isabel could hardly sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities: a lost grail, a relic from Jerusalem, or perhaps documents that would rewrite medieval history. She knew the odds of finding anything at all were slim, yet her heart insisted she press on. In her twilight of near slumber, she conjured images of knights riding under moonlight, safeguarding a chest bound with iron. She saw flickers of torches illuminating ancient stone corridors, and she heard the faint echo of a vow, sworn in faith and sealed by secrecy. Morning came, along with a queue of paperwork and bureaucratic hurdles. Isabel spent days petitioning the Ministry of Culture, for a small-scale archaeological probe. Her academic credentials helped, as did the endorsement of Father Paolo, who stressed the potential historical value. Reluctantly, the ministry granted provisional approval, scheduling a survey with ground-penetrating radar to verify any cavity behind the wall. If the scan confirmed a hollow space, they would consider further action. While she waited, Isabel delved deeper into Templar archives. She found references to Émile de Charnay in old French records, confirming that he had indeed fled to Portugal after the Templars' downfall. A handful of letters from Luca della Torre survived, praising King Denis for his clemency. Everything matched the narrative that a group of Templars, along with a mysterious trunk, had settled in Tomar. But nowhere did it explicitly say what was inside. At last, the day of the radar scan arrived. A small team gathered in the catacombs, hauling the portable equipment through the dim corridors. Miguel Coelho, the journalist, showed up uninvited, camera in hand, eager to document the day we discover the Templar treasure. Isabel groaned internally, but it was too late to chase him off without causing a scene. They powered on the device, carefully moving it across the surface of the wall. The radar pulses sent data to a screen. Tense silence ensued as the operator interpreted the signals. Then he nodded. There's definitely a void on the other side, maybe a meter or so deep before another layer of stone or rubble. A ripple of excitement passed through the group. Father Paolo crossed himself, murmuring a prayer. Isabel's heart thundered. The operator continued. Hard to say how large the void is, but it's not a natural collapse. Likely an intentional space. Eyes turned to the ministry official, an older woman in a crisp blazer. She exhaled sharply, pursing her lips. Fine. We'll request a specialist team for a minimal incursion. No heavy machinery. We do this carefully and properly. She glared at Miguel, who was filming her reaction. No sensational headlines yet, please. This is an archaeological process, not a treasure hunt. But the cat was out of the bag. Word spread quickly among the local press, fueling speculation that a secret Templar chamber had been discovered. Blogs erupted with theories about the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or suppressed documents that could change the world. Isabel tried to keep her focus. She was determined to approach this as a scholar, not a fantasist. Still, she couldn't deny a thrill coursing through her. If they opened that sealed wall and found a centuries-old trunk, it would be the discovery of a lifetime.